Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA greats against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names, and sometimes compare players from different positions. For example, lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, just because of their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do a comparison not between just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and even the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and have similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 6 different metrics to compare each player. The first category is scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game both in the regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game both regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency and advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage per and win shares per 48, both in the regular season and playoffs. The reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Field goal percentage tends to be biased to big men because of their height and play style closer to the basket. I also put in win shares per 48 here because it encompasses efficiency along with other attributes to give you an idea of how many wins a player contributes to his team. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks and steals in this comparison is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have steals and blocks tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by All-Star appearances, All-NBA selections, MVPs, Finals MVPs, and championships as the first, second, or third best player. The reason I have to only count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise you get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if they weren't a top 3 player on their team contributing to a championship. I know including All-Star selections is a little bit controversial because it's fan voted, but ultimately this is what the Hall of Fame uses in their criteria to induct a player, as unfair as it sounds. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them as equivalent to their respective NBA stats and awards. The only one that's different about the ABA is that instead of Finals MVP, they have Playoffs MVP, which honestly is a better idea than Finals MVP since it accounts for the whole playoffs, but just to keep it simple, I'll be referring to the ABA Playoffs MVP as Finals MVP here. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are counted, because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 80s, which is unfair to older players. Also, I'm not using any career total stats because that's a longevity thing. For example, no one would say that Karl Malone was a better scorer than Michael Jordan, even though he has more total points. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I have not watched most of these players live, or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. No time travel or what if this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. I'll be strictly basing their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. The 7th episode in the series examines 2 all-time great small forwards who could do a little bit of everything on offense, especially when it came to scoring. Elgin Baylor was the first LA Lakers superstar who lit up the scoring charts, carried the Lakers to 8 NBA Finals alongside his co-star Jerry West, and was one of the first high-flying superstars in the league's history. While Rick Barry was an elite offensive star who came into the league admiring Baylor and eventually became both an ABA and Golden State Warriors legend, carrying the franchise to a championship on his back. Both players were amongst the most prolific wing scorers in NBA history, so let's take a look at who had the greater career. In the scoring category, it's very close as both players had absolutely ridiculous scoring numbers in their career. Baylor averaged 27.4 points per game for his career, the 3rd highest scoring average of all time, peaking at a monstrous 38.3 points per game in 1962, the best scoring average by a player not named Wilt Chamberlain. In the playoffs, he averaged 27 points per game, and peaking at an incredible 38.6 points per game in 1962. Baylor scored 71 points in a game before, the highest by a player not named Wilt, until David Thompson broke it with 73 points in 1978. Although Rick Barry's career points per game is slightly lower at 24.8 points per game, his peaks were almost as high, averaging 35.6 points per game in 1967, which was only his second season in the league, and 27.3 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at a ridiculous 40.1 points per game in 1970 in the ABA. He also has 2 scoring titles, leading both the NBA and ABA in scoring, the only player to ever do so, and also holds the highest final scoring average of all time at 36 points per game. Both players are amongst the most gifted and lethal scorers in NBA history, so I had to put this category as a tie. This category is definitely not as close as the first one. Rick Barry was a very good rebounder for his position, averaging 6.7 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at 10.6 a game in 1966, and 6.4 rebounds a game in the playoffs, peaking at 11.7 a game in 1971. These are very solid numbers overall, but Elgin Baylor was a different beast. He has the highest rebounding average out of any small forward in NBA history at 13.5 rebounds a game, peaking at a Dennis Rodman-like 19.8 rebounds per game in 1961. In the playoffs, he put up 12.9 boards a game, peaking at 17.7 rebounds per game in 1962. Keep in mind that Elgin Baylor was only 6'5". Therefore, this category has to go to Elgin Baylor. In this category, both players were very good passers for their position as well. Baylor averaged 4.3 assists per game for his career, peaking at 5.4 a game in 1969-1970, and 4 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 5.6 a game in 1964. These normally would be enough to put Baylor in the high ranking of a passing small forward, but Rick Barry's playmaking skills put him alongside John Havlicek as perhaps the first point forwards in league history. Barry averaged 4.9 assists per game for his career, peaking at a point guard like 6.3 per game in 1979, while averaging 4.3 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 6.5 a game in 1976. Although Baylor was a very good passer for his position, Barry is one of the best passing small forwards of all time, just below LeBron and Larry Bird. Therefore, this category goes to Rick Barry. In the efficiency and advanced metrics category, it's fairly close. Baylor has the edge in PER, while Barry's all-time great free throw shooting puts him ahead in true shooting percentage and win shares per 48. Ultimately though, Barry's edge isn't significant enough to give him a total win here, so I had to put this category as a tie. In this category, it's also very close, but not because both players are good defenders, but because both players were very mediocre defenders. Neither Baylor or Barry could be considered a better defender than the other, and this is reflected in the fact that neither have any all-defensive selections and neither have much difference in their defensive win shares, so this category will also be a tie. In the awards category, both were considered to be the best at their position for a very long time, as reflected by their numerous All-NBA first-team selections. However, Elgin Baylor has long been considered as one of the greatest players never to win a ring, as he retired just 9 games into the 1972 season, the season where the Lakers finally broke through and won a championship. Baylor led the Lakers to 8 finals though, so that deserves credit. Rick Barry has 3 finals appearances on his resume, carrying all 3 teams as their main offensive star. He carried the Warriors to the finals twice, winning the second time while having no other all-star surrounding cast around him, and also carried the ABA Nets to the finals as well. Ultimately, although you could consider Baylor a very unlucky superstar, Barry's championship and finals MVP puts him over the top for me, so this one goes to Rick Barry. So when all the categories are summed up, Elgin Baylor takes the lead in rebounding, while Rick Barry takes the lead in passing and awards, while the other categories remain a tie, giving Barry the overall win. Both Baylor and Barry are 2 of the greatest and yet underrated small forwards of all time. They were all-time lethal scorers, and their forgotten reputation may be due to the fact that Baylor's prime was very short due to his persistent injuries, and Barry's career is split between the NBA and ABA. Barry may be even more underrated than Baylor though, due to a negative perception about his personality, whether warranted or not. I hope you guys enjoy this comparison. As always, thanks for watching, be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next comparison video.